Archaeologists spend their whole lives tirelessly digging through the earth, searching for clues about the people, places, and civilizations that came long before us. But not everything they find gives them the answers they're hoping for. Sometimes, the deeper they dig, the stranger things become. From bizarre ancient objects to unexplained ruins buried beneath the ground, today, we're going to show you the 15 most mysterious ancient discoveries found in recent years. Number 15. The Devil's Footprint of Manchester. Well, a scorched red footprint pressed into stone is exactly the sort of thing small towns know how to turn into legend. In Manchester, that mark is known as the Devil's Footprint, and locals have been telling the same eerie story about it for generations. The strange shape can be seen in a stone fence at one of the area's cemeteries, facing directly toward the entrance of the North Manchester Meeting House, which has stood there since 1793. According to local tradition, the rock once blocked a construction project and refused to be moved. Frustrated, one worker supposedly joked that he would sell his soul to the devil if the stone could just be shifted. The next morning, he was gone. The rock had moved, and burned into its side was a mark that looked disturbingly like a hoof or footprint. Whether anyone believes the story is beside the point. The image is still there, and its placement outside a Christian church only makes the whole thing feel stranger. Some stories survive because nobody can fully explain them. At number 14, Laguna copperplate inscription. The ancient history of the Philippines is still full of blank spaces, which is exactly why this artifact matters so much. This thing is known as the Laguna copperplate inscription, and it's considered one of the most important historical objects ever found in the country. It surfaced in 1987 after being pulled from the Lumbang River during dredging work, despite having been created more than 1,000 years earlier. The text engraved on it is written in early Kawi script, and that alone is enough to make historians pay attention. Kawi originated in Java, Indonesia, which immediately suggests that the Philippines may not have been as isolated from the wider region as once believed. The inscription itself is frustratingly incomplete. It opens with a date, in referencing the Saka year 822 and a specific lunar phase, but without the missing context, the meaning becomes slippery. It sounds formal, maybe even legal, but nobody can say for certain. Number 13. The Lapa do Picareiro stone tools. For years, one of the cleaner theories about Neanderthals in Iberia went something like this. Modern humans arrived in the peninsula, Neanderthals retreated into the western edge of it, and for a while there was a kind of final standoff before one species disappeared. It's a very nice theory. Unfortunately, archaeology hates niceness. Excavations at Lapa do Picareiro, a cave in Portugal, have produced stone tools showing that modern humans were present in the region around 41,000 years ago, which is thousands of years earlier than many earlier estimates for human settlement in western Iberia. And that changes the books immediately. If humans were already there that early, then the old image of Neanderthals holding out behind some invisible boundary starts looking far too simple. There may have been overlap, contact, competition, or even periods of coexistence in ways we still don't fully understand. The cave doesn't hand over a dramatic answer. It does something more annoying and more important. It quietly removes certainty. And once certainty goes, history has to start behaving a little more honestly. Number 12. Ancient stone mounds of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is full of ancient things that people notice every day without ever really seeing them, and these weird stone and earth mounds are a perfect example. They have sat in plain sight for centuries, large enough to dominate the landscape, but nobody can say with certainty why they were built. Some of them rise as high as a modern 6-story building, which means constructing them over 2,500 years ago would have required enormous labor and planning. Archaeologists have investigated a few of the mounds before. Most appear to be hollow or empty, but one of them was found to contain a storage structure around 2,700 years old. Inside were jar handles stamped with symbols linked to the Kingdom of Judah, which ties the site loosely to the First Temple period. That gives the mounds some historical footing, but not much clarity. Without a solid explanation, local folklore has stepped in to fill the silence. Some believe they were built by the Rephaim, the giant race mentioned in the Old Testament. Well, it sounds cool, but it solves nothing. Number 11. Wall mural at Vishama, Peru rarely runs out of archaeological surprises, but this one has a strange energy all its own. Back in August 2019, archaeologists working at the ancient site of Vishama, not far from Lima, uncovered a 3,800-year-old wall mural, unlike anything previously found in the area. It was discovered inside a ceremonial building, carved directly into an old wall, and what it shows is open to interpretation. Most people see something that looks like a toad with a smiling human face reaching toward a separate human head. That alone is unsettling enough. Dr. Ruth Shady Solis, an expert in ancient Andean civilizations, believes the mural represents the arrival of water through rainfall. In that symbolic system, toads were associated with water, while the human face may represent life continuing through hardship. Nearby, another image shows a human head surrounded by snakes, which is harder to explain. Solis suspects both murals may have been created during a period of drought and collapse. The civilization that once lived there appears to have declined around the same time, and that timing feels impossible to ignore. Number 10. Headless Buddha statue in Chongqing. Sometimes history does not need to be unearthed with careful excavation. Sometimes it is just sitting there, buried under weeds, waiting for someone to finally clear the mess away. That is exactly what happened back in December 2020 in Chongqing, southwest China, when residents of an apartment building decided to clean up an overgrown patch behind their complex. What they found was hard to ignore once the vegetation was gone. A massive Buddha statue built directly into the slope behind the apartments. The figure stands around 30 feet tall, though its head is missing. Early assessments suggest it may be around 1,000 years old. One elderly resident claims he remembers seeing the statue in his youth and insists it still had a head back then, though he has no idea what happened to it. Another local believes there was once a temple on the site before it was demolished during the 1980s to make way for the apartment block. Official records do not support that story, but honestly, it would explain quite a lot. Number 9. The ancient Greek pyramid of Keros. The island of Keros already had enough mystery without anyone digging under it. Rising out of the Aegean Sea, the site looks unique on its own. A naturally shaped hill that ancient builders transformed into something far stranger by covering it with gleaming white stone, turning it into what must once have looked like a stepped monument shining over the water. That would have been impressive enough. But the real shock was underneath. Archaeologists later uncovered a hidden system of drainage and irrigation tunnels beneath the structure, and some of the engineering appears to predate similar advances elsewhere in the region by more than 1,000 years. There are also signs of unexpectedly sophisticated metalworking, which creates an awkward problem for anyone who assumed the people here were operating with simpler tools and simpler minds. Then there's the marble. Huge amounts of it had to be transported from other islands, likely requiring thousands of trips by sea. That's not random labor. That's planning, ambition, and obsession. Whoever built this place clearly wanted it to be remembered. Number 8. The magical Islamic stone of Iraq. Few artifacts feel as if they are actively mocking the people trying to understand them, but this one comes close. Known as the magical Islamic stone of Iraq, the object has puzzled scholars for years because nobody can agree on what its markings actually say, or whether they mean anything at all. The stone was brought to wider attention by Sir Richard Francis Burton, the 19th century English explorer who claimed to have found it in Mesopotamia. He also insisted it had been carved from a meteorite, though experts at London's Natural History Museum believe it is more likely made of quartz. The inscriptions are thought to resemble Kufic script, which would place the object around the 8th century. But every attempt to translate the writing has ended in frustration. The symbols simply refuse to form a coherent message. That has led some historians to suspect Burton may have faked the markings himself. It would not be completely out of character. He was brilliant, but also theatrical enough to enjoy leaving behind a mystery no one could solve. Number 7. The Macoupin County coal bed skeleton. This is the kind of discovery that makes archaeology quietly clear its throat and look away. Back in 1862, reports emerged from Macoupin County, claiming that the bones of an adult human had been found buried deep inside a coal bed, under layers of rock and slate roughly 90 feet below ground. If that sounds dramatic, it gets worse. A coal of that kind should be around 286 million years old, which means if the report were accurate, the skeleton would completely obliterate everything we think we know about human history. Naturally, that's a fairly inconvenient possibility. The problem is that the evidence is trapped in the worst possible place, the 19th century. The records are sketchy, the scientific methods of the time were primitive by modern standards, and most importantly, the bones themselves have long since disappeared, so no one can test them properly now. That leaves the entire case hanging in that deeply annoying space between impossible and unresolved. It's probably not proof of ancient humans in the Carboniferous period, but it's exactly the kind of story that refuses to die because nobody can fully bury it either. Number 6. Stone coffin at Friars Church. Finding one medieval coffin is enough to get archaeologists interested. Finding a second coffin hidden inside the first is the kind of thing that instantly makes people uncozy. But that is exactly what happened at the former site of Friars Church in Leicester, the same spot made famous by the discovery of King Richard III's remains. A few years after that major find, archaeologists uncovered a large stone coffin and eventually decided to open it. What they found inside was another coffin, this one made of lead and far more ornate. The outer stone casket dates to the 14th century, and was so heavy that it took 8 people to lift the lid. The smaller inner coffin bears a crucifix and may be from the same period, though some experts believe it could be older. A damage at the foot of the lead coffin has raised an unsettling possibility. It may have been buried once, exhumed later, and then sealed again inside the stone shell. That has inspired one very medieval theory. Someone may have feared whoever was inside might come back. Number 5. The Bourne stone. We mean, even today in 2026, the Bourne stone is still a complete mystery. Today it sits in a museum in Massachusetts, but its known history begins much earlier, when it served as a doorstep for a Native American meeting house in Bourne during the 17th century. The stone itself, along with the markings carved into it, is believed to be much older than that, though nobody can say exactly how old. Over time, it passed through several locations before finally ending up somewhere it could be properly studied. That study, unfortunately, has not solved much. In the 1970s, historian Barry Fell claimed the inscription was ancient Iberian and translated it as a declaration of possession by someone named Hanno. His work was later heavily discredited. More recent experts, including linguist Michael Barnes, argue that the symbols are far more likely to be Native American petroglyphs. The problem is, no living community has been able to translate them either, so the stone continues to keep its own counsel. Number 4. Rocky Valley Labyrinth. Just a mile from Tintagel Castle in Cornwall, a place already wrapped in Arthurian legend, sits another mystery that somehow gets far less attention than it deserves. Hidden near the ruins of an old mill, the Rocky Valley labyrinths are carved directly into stone and have been puzzling people for decades. Most archaeologists believe they date back to the Bronze Age, though nobody can prove it with confidence. Their age, purpose, and origin are all still debated. Because the carvings are tucked away in such an awkward location, They remained unnoticed until 1948, when someone happened to spot them from an airplane. Since then, theories have multiplied faster than answers. Some researchers think the patterns may be linked to ancient Celtic fertility symbolism. Modern pagans visit the site every year and claim it holds spiritual importance. Others have argued, somewhat absurdly, that bored mill workers carved them as a joke in the 18th century. But that theory falls apart once you consider the effort involved. Number 3. Clockjack of Lincoln Cathedral. It is hard to imagine how something this strange stayed hidden for so long, and especially inside a building as famous and heavily studied as Lincoln Cathedral. But in 2018, during an audit of one of the cathedral's towers, workers found a forgotten wooden figure tucked away out of sight. Standing about 3 feet tall, the carved sculpture depicts a knight and is believed to have once served as a clockjack, a moving figure tied to a mechanical clock. Nobody knows exactly why it was removed or hidden, but it once belonged to the old clock in the cathedral's north vestibule. That clock has been repaired, altered, and rebuilt many times over the centuries, though parts of it still date back to the 1380s. The figure itself is probably not quite that old. Based on the armor and the bearded face, experts believe it is more likely to come from the 16th century. At number 2, the Watlington Hoard coins don't usually ruin historical reputations, but the Watlington Hoard managed to do exactly that. Discovered near Watlington in Oxfordshire and officially declared treasure in 2016, the hoard includes more than 200 coins, silver ingots, and several pieces of personal jewelry. Well, it's useful and valuable, obviously, but the real damage came from the faces stamped onto the silver. Among the coins are examples showing Alfred the Great standing alongside Ceolwulf II of Mercia, and that pairing is where things get messy. For years, Ceolwulf has often been treated like a political afterthought, the sort of ruler who barely mattered before Alfred pushed past him. But coins don't usually waste space honoring nobodies. If these two men appeared together, and it strongly suggests they were not enemies in the way later history preferred to imagine. It points instead to an alliance, possibly one that mattered more in the struggle against the Vikings than anyone had fully appreciated. A buried handful of silver isn't supposed to rewrite political history, but sometimes history is less sturdy than people pretend it is. All right now, let's end this with number 1. Ancient Chinese puzzle balls. Long before anyone was twisting a Rubik's Cube and pretending not to get annoyed, people in ancient China were already wrestling with something just as maddening. These objects, known as puzzle balls, date back to the 14th century and remain one of the most baffling examples of historical craftsmanship ever produced. They are made from ivory, which would make them illegal to create today, and many contain around 20 delicate inner layers, all somehow carved from a single solid piece. That is the part nobody can fully explain. There are no seams, no joins, and no obvious method. Even highly skilled artisans still struggle to understand how they were made. The balls are designed so that if every opening is lined up correctly, you can look straight through the center. That sounds simple until you actually try to imagine moving one layer without disturbing the others. Ming Dynasty scholar Gao Zhao owned several and hated them enough to call them the devil's work. Honestly, after looking at one for 5 minutes, that reaction feels completely fair. Well, that's all for today's video. Hope you've enjoyed it. And in the end, as we always say, be sure to like and subscribe. Until then, take care and be curious.